Thank you, Gilbert. I hope I'm clear.
Yes, you are clear. You can go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Just trying to test this technology. You can't tell whether um, it's working. And apologies for the little challenges we had in the at the beginning. Um, Thank you so much, Gilbert, for inviting me to make opening remarks for this second conference for the Africa Cybersecurity Defense Forum. I have a prepared speech, so I'll go straight to it and probably make a few off-the-cuff remarks at the tail end of it. So, good morning. I believe it's morning in most places, parts of the world now. Um, I would like to welcome you all to the Africa Cyber Defense Forum 2021 edition. Our theme this year is rethinking the new management models towards cyber resilience. As a global scientists, healthcare professionals, governments keep the fight to get out of the pandemic. Cyber criminals have continued to take advantage of the situation, and our headlines have been dotted with even more devastating cyber attacks targeting critical national infrastructures all over the world. Additionally, the continent's cybercrime trends have really been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic due to the accelerated adoption of connectivity tools to facilitate, amongst other tools, working remotely, e-learning, Web 2, which includes social media and e-commerce. I expect that the deliberations during this conference will provide a platform to imminent solution to our collective exposure to this pervasive threat. As we gather again today virtually to deliberate on this important theme, Afralty is proud to be a strategic partner of Africa Cyber Defense Forum. This year discussions will focus on key topics such as data protection, cloud security, democracy and protection of national critical infrastructures, IoT and convergence, supply chain security, among other sessions that you'll be introduced to during the sharing of the whole agenda. The forum, through its well-created and world-class content, engages top-level government officials, technology experts, business leaders, and other leaders of society to shape the continental, regional, and industry agenda in the African cyberspace. This year's edition of the forum will feature over 33 sessions, as well as the Africa Cyber Olympics that has registered the participation of over 12 African countries and a total of 44 teams. And this is an improvement from what we had last year. Um, for these 44 teams have qualified for the final 24-hour hands-on challenge on different scenarios in cyber defense, cyber warfare, and digital forensics, among others. We are more than grateful to our keynote speakers and many other speakers who have accepted to join us at this forum. Specifically, I'd like to recognize the following. Chris Kubeka, CEO of Hypersec, Bharat Patyavadi, COO of the Center of the Strategic Cyberspace and International Studies, Andy Chadwick, head of Africa Cyber Network, UK FCDO, and leading the Digital Access Program by the UK government. Susie Hargreaves, OBE, CEO of Internet Watch Foundation, Bruce McConnell, Distinguished Fellow, ORF America, Dr. Martin Koyabe of the Global Forum for Cyber Experts, and Mr. William Makatiani, CEO of Seriano. And to all other speakers, I'd like to thank you all for creating time to be part of this conference this year, and we don't take this for granted. I would also like to thank our partners and sponsors who supported our vision this year. And this include CompTIA, Afralty, Innovis, CISO Forum Global, the Center of Strategic Cyberspace, and International Studies. It's my hope that as we continue to hold this annual event, we will have more organizations, both from the public and private sector, joining us as partners to support this forum in an endeavor to make our continent cyberspace safe through sharing of knowledge and experience, and also enhancing collaboration with the global experts. I would also like to thank the SCDF Advisory Board, whose support in providing strategic guidance to the SCDF team has been invaluable. Lastly, I would also like to thank the SCDF Secretariat led by the CEO, Gilbert Nyandeja, for the sterling job they have done to ensure that the virtual conference takes off without a hitch. With these few remarks, I would like to wish you all a wonderful two-day forum full of learning and great exchange of ideas. I thank you and welcome you again to this conference, and I hope that the deliberation will be useful to all the fraternity in cybersecurity and cyberspace in Africa as a whole. Thank you so much and welcome. Back to you, Gilbert.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your wonderful presentation, and thank you for the speech. I want to appreciate you, and as well, we have also our keynote speakers with us ready.
In cybersecurity and cyberspace in Africa
So
as a whole. Thank you so much and welcome.
Yeah. So
back to you, Gilbert.
So I'll pass over to our keynote speaker, Chris. Just a minute. Thank you so much. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. And thank you for the speech. Okay. Thank you, William. Thank you so much. On stage, I will welcome Chris, but 1 minute, let's transition. Okay. So on stage, I will welcome Chris Kubeka, who will be giving a keynote. Chris, if you are ready, you can just have the stage.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. I hope everyone is doing well, and I'm very, very thankful to this conference and to Gilbert for inviting me. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and don't worry, I won't kill you with slides. It's only 96 slides. Just joking. And we're going to talk about some of the challenges that our chairman mentioned, as well as other challenges in ensuring that the continent can counter some of the nation state actors as well as cyber criminals. Now, in addition to being the CEO of HypaSec, which handles incident response and cyber warfare events, I'm also the distinguished chair of the Middle East Institute Cyber Program, and I lead that with Richard Clark, who is the chairman of our board at the Middle East Institute. We are a not-for-profit 75-year institution as of this year. My main areas are critical national infrastructure and control systems, as well as cyber warfare. Previous to establishing HypaSec, I headed the information protection group for Aramco, and I was the one that was contacted by Aramco when they were hit with what is probably still the world's most devastating cyber warfare attack that knocked out communications across the country of Saudi Arabia and caused gasoline shortages across the nation, as well as others. And previous to that, I was in the U.S. Air Force as both an aircrew member as a load master, and also handled command and control systems and space IoT telemetry. It just wasn't called IoT back then, for Space Command. I started pretty young. I was taught programming by my mother, who was a robotics programmer on assembly line manufacturing. Unfortunately, when I was 10 years old, I did a little oopsie and got busted for breaking into the Department of Justice and the FBI. So don't follow in my footsteps. Now, there are a lot of security challenges, both around the world and on the continent. And the problem is, when you've got all these security challenges, it makes it quite easy for cyber criminals and nation state actors. And unfortunately, sometimes some countries actually employ cyber criminals because they may be sanctioned countries. A good example is North Korea, where they still have to make money and get around sanctions. And so they employ different types of malware and ransomware and so forth to bring money into the economy. Now, some of these challenges are even worse when you think that how many things can connect to the internet? How many access points are there, entry and exit points? And typically, the longer a company has been around, the more access points, exit and entry points there probably are. It also means that there are a lot of systems that they just don't know about. I heard about a crucial database system that had been walled in with only the network cable sticking out, and the company found it during a renovation. So these things happen. Now, another issue that we have is security is definitely hard, and it's my personal opinion that a lot of security vendors and tech vendors make it more difficult because it means that you're tied to their technology and you have to do their various vendor-specific certifications in order to deal with the technology. So there is no imperative for many IT and security vendors to actually make security easier for us. Now, we're also grappling with the challenge that more and more things are being connected. We've already expanded the IP version 4 space to IP version 6. We're now being able to leapfrog, especially in places like the Middle East and many parts of Africa, directly to 5G where it's available. And that just means more and more things connected, more and more risk. Another issue is there is not a lot of software development life cycle that goes on with project management. Unfortunately, a lot of project managers do not understand the technology that they're dealing with, or understand that they need to think about security as part of the basis of the project plan. And I've heard many horror stories from even software developers going, well, we wanted to test it and we wanted to put in things like patch management and so forth, but project manager said no. Another issue is the lack of opportunity. Security education can be quite expensive and outside the reach of a lot of people around the world. I'll give you a great example. SANS costs about $10,000 a week in person, and that is as much as a car. And you shouldn't have to spend as much as a car for 1 week's worth of education. And security is typically, and unfortunately, a bolt-on action, where if it's not thought of from the beginning with the project plan, if there is a project plan, then boom, let's add security in. And the problem with that is it ends up costing more money when you have to add things in, and usually it is not done very well. Now, the chairman mentioned remote accessibility, especially due to the pandemic. And what that means is, feel free to use this hashtag, BYOH, bring your own house. That means that if you've now been moved from the office where it might have a firewall and all these different other types of security items, you probably don't have it in your house. And you most likely have to share internet connectivity with someone else. could be your children, it could be your neighbors, if you can even get stable internet, and it might not be that safe. Now, that also means that there's going to be increases in exploitable vulnerabilities, because now you've increased that attack surface exponentially. So when it comes to critical national infrastructure, the same thing is occurring. More and more critical national infrastructure, especially during the pandemic, which has accelerated remote capabilities, has caused an absolute nightmare for all of us watching this. But at the same time, it's been a huge moneymaker for cyber criminals, and also a huge opportunity for various nation state actors to gain information and a foothold into various critical national infrastructure around the world, and especially in Africa. I was reading an article that was posted 11 years ago, and I believe it was Bloomberg that said that if Africa did not start catching up to basic cybersecurity, there would be enough exploitable vulnerabilities that could knock out entire energy grids. And unfortunately, that situation has not drastically changed both on the continent or around the world. Typically, this is because privately owned companies, they're looking at their bottom line. Can they pay their executives a bonus, their management a bonus? And how much money do they need to actually devote to security? And can they see the value in doing so? Because a lot of executives, they see security as this black hole where money just goes in and there's no return. But I think we all know that when we lock our houses, doors, windows, etc., there's a return of investment for doing these items, because that means that it's less likely that somebody can break in. And even if they try to break in, hopefully someone will be able to catch them. So there needs to be a change in the way that a lot of executives think, where security actually minimizes risk and does have return on investment. Because I think everyone is tired of data breaches or ransomware or financial related types of crimes and regular everyday scams. Now, this particular graph was taken looking at post-COVID for the amount of systems around the world by the top 10 countries, and looking at A, the number of systems connected to the internet that say hello, and B, in the lower graph, is the number of those systems which have known remote access vulnerabilities which can be exploited. And as we see, South Africa, which is on the continent, is number 10 on the list, but it has a significant amount of vulnerabilities versus the amount of systems online. Now, I do want to assure everyone listening that everyone is vulnerable. Given enough time and effort, and also multiplied by the amount of systems online, there is going to be some case where there is an open hole that a group can use to get into these things. And this can be scary because, again, private companies and many times governmental agencies don't have very many requirements to actually be secure. Private companies lack regulation, and government agencies typically do not want to reveal that they have had any sort of issues, even though government agencies are typically supposed to be owned by the country's citizens, and this is very unfortunate. Now, some of the things that can happen is there are some actors, whether they are cyber criminals or they are nation states, or whether they just do it for the lulz and like chaos, try to destabilize different things. They could also do it for economic purposes, to try to lower a stock value or affect a company's market value and then do a hostile takeover. A lot of these cases, it really relates to either money or information. But usually that information, even when a nation state does these types of things, is related to allowing those countries to gain an economic advantage. There's also been some unfortunate cases of terrorist groups which have gone out and used different types of malware and different types of attacks to actually gain access and use it as an extortion method. I've been involved in one particular case where an embassy was hacked by an insider with a lot of access, and that particular insider was working with a terrorist group called ISIS. And that terrorist group threatened to kill over 400 people if we didn't pay them $50 million. Now imagine that. And these things keep going and going because if they can't do physical crimes, especially during the pandemic, they're shifting over to digital crimes because it's cheaper and easier. And if they don't have the skills to do these types of attacks, we've also seen that in India, the terrorist group ISIS actually put ads in some of these smaller papers saying, hey, work for us, we'll pay you to be a hacker. And it was open and blatant. And the newspaper companies actually ran the ads without looking at them and approved them. So we've got a lot of challenges. And when you find something, you run into, is this legal to actually report? Will I get sued? Will I get arrested? I was in this particular situation when it came to Boeing. I was able to ethically and legally, under Dutch law, hack into Boeing's infrastructure, get into their research and development, their aviation ID system, which is a system that actually technicians use to update aircraft. And Boeing tried some naughty things. And in the end, the United States government stepped in and told Boeing that they had to fix their stuff. And Boeing subsequently set up a vulnerability disclosure program based on my 60-page report or 56-page report, something like that. There were a lot of things wrong with them. But sometimes if you see something and you want to say something, one of the best avenues that you can use is a national level computer emergency response team. And that way it shields you in many cases from arrest or a lawsuit. Now, one of the challenges that the African continent has in particular is a lack of opportunity. And I say this because it certainly isn't a lack of people who want to be in this field. On the contrary, this is a field that can empower people. I remember when I was growing up and we had very little money, and I was determined to never return to that state. And when I saw that the digital world could grant me that opportunity, it was fantastic. And nowadays, in some countries, a person in cybersecurity who has a good background, applicable knowledge, and certain types of certifications can make more than a medical doctor. So the opportunity is there. However, the opportunities within the continent are very difficult. Think about what it costs to set up your own company in your country, all the licensing fees, all the additional fees, things you didn't even think of, legal fees, etc., etc. And there's also another challenge, and this is around the world, but especially in some areas of the world, like parts of the African continent, where education is just not tech-focused enough. And part of this problem is driven by the fact that internet infrastructure around parts of the continent of Africa just aren't there. I remember years ago, the last time I was in Tanzania, I was handling an investigation with an exploration company, and they were hacked by the Chinese government. And the only reason why they didn't lose all their data was because their internet connection was so slow, the exploration data could not actually leave their network. So it was good for this particular type of attack, but bad because it posed so many challenges, and it was so absolutely frustrated. This company and everyday people just did not have good enough internet to be part of the digital world 100%. And this is one of the things that needs to be addressed, as well as getting more tech-focused education starting from very early on. The ability to use tablets, smartphones, computers, and the availability of these things. And unfortunately, some of the challenges with this and the infrastructure for the internet and tech-focused education is also driven by lack of stable electricity. And you can't have a computer thinking that it's going to work when you're stuck with generator power filling in for the hours that the electric company cannot provide. Another one that I absolutely hate, and I mentioned this in the opening, is the cost of tech certifications. Now, most of the tech certifications are driven from the Western world, and there's only a handful of certification tests, exams, and training that actually are not vendor specific and don't cost a huge amount of money. And when I hear many of these big, like top 4 various consulting and accounting firms saying and issuing reports, well, there's a skills gap, there's not enough people in cybersecurity. Well, there's 2 great reasons for that. It isn't really so much a skills shortage as it is the fact that it costs so much in many cases to enter the field. And also, human resources does not help when they list that you must have 25 different certifications to apply for an entry-level job. Another issue is there's a lack of digitization policy and vision plans in many countries in Africa. Now, if we look at UAE, for example, they have vision plans of 2030 and 2050, where it says that they want all government services to be online and for you to be able to have a digital ID to be able to conduct business. They say it'll improve healthcare, it'll decrease the amount of bureaucracy and red tape, but underneath some of that is it will also decrease corruption. Now, I want to stress, corruption is everywhere. I live in the Netherlands, and we have corruption all over the place. However, it just seems more hidden and more accepted in certain areas in the West. But this is something that the cost of setup of your business, if you haven't done so already, you're going to run into some of these things. And digitization plans cuts down on that ability for someone to ask for a bribe, for example. All you have to do instead is sign in with their digital ID and go through the process without interacting with a human being. So there are many things that much of the continent can do, but right now there is not enough planning. And I do stress there needs to be more planning. Now, some of the deterrents to your everyday cyber criminals, to cyber gangs, which are very well formed because they see so much money in it, and also nation-state attackers looking to get a foothold into critical national infrastructure, is actively looking at what exposure you or your organization has. And I'm a big proponent of active defense. So instead of waiting for the house to burn down, put a smoke alarm in it. And make sure you put that smoke alarm in areas that would be at higher risk of fire. And there are many low-cost, no-cost tools that you can do this with. One of the tools that I use a lot is called Censys, CENSYS.io. They do have a free service where you can look up your domain information and see if there's any gaping holes that are in it. Another one that you can use, which is for free, is called Canary Tokens, where it's got about 25 different options where it can produce a fake Word document or Excel spreadsheet or PDF or fake URL for a website. And these things are built so that there is no legitimate reason why anybody would be looking into those documents or URLs, etc. And the moment that someone does, then suddenly you get an alert that says somebody accessed an area that they should not. And then you know, is it malware or is it somebody already in your network or in your computer system? Because you can also put it on your computer system. And then you can actually take action. Providing the opportunities that many African countries currently are lacking. And I do stress this is so important. Another issue is how to responsibly disclose if you find issues within critical national infrastructure, for example, and where to disclose to make sure that you're protected because you do not want the police knocking at your door. We've also found that regional approaches are better because there are typically shared goals and, to a certain extent, a certain level of shared culture. And it's unfortunate that the world can't come together for everything. There still is no international consensus on cyber warfare, for example. But regionally, this has been actually much more successful. And another thing is, and this is something that really is a bit of a pet peeve, is the fact that lack of various different types of opportunities within certain areas of the world cause a lot of brain drain. And we've seen this even in the Western world from Eastern Europe into the West. And what happens is suddenly doctors can make more money over in the West, or cybersecurity people can make more money in the West. And then you're trying to get different opportunities. But that leaves the home country dependent on those who gain those opportunities and leaves them lacking the people that they need to plan properly and so forth. So if enough opportunity is put into national level policy in many parts of Africa, hopefully this brain drain and people having to leave their families, their home, their culture, their language, etc., will be reduced. So it's something to consider because one of the things that we need to ensure is that no country or region or continent is left behind in the digital world. So I wanted to thank Gilbert and the conference. If you want to check out how to do active deterrence, my last book, Hack the World with Open Source Intelligence Gathering, will help you with that. And it uses the free version of Census because I believe that you should be able to use low-cost, no-cost tools. And if you want to learn about web application hacking, there's another book, and also that uses free tools as well. So there's no more excuse for an organization saying that they don't have the budget to give security tools to their security staff. And if you would like to get in touch with me or know more, my profile is on the Middle East Institute's website, listed in the URL there. So I tried to leave enough room for some questions because I love questions. So please feel free. Don't be shy. Give me lots of questions. Any questions?
Question mode is on for attendees who want to ask a question to Chris. The floor is yours.
I love questions. Might not have had enough caffeine to answer them properly, but I love questions. Now I feel like there should be hold music. Oh, maybe one. No.
If they have any questions, they can reach out to Chris and the email provided.
Absolutely. And I also leave my DMs open for Twitter, if you happen to be on Twitter. So if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. And also any sort of additional insight, because most of the time that I've been on the continent, I've actually spent in East Africa.
Yeah, sure. So I think anyone should be able to reach out if there's any question. Thank you so much, Chris. I want to appreciate you for joining us. And thank you so much for taking your time to join us. Thank you.
Cheers, all.
And have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thank you. Thank you. Next on stage, we welcome Bharat, who is representing the Center for Strategic Cyberspace. Welcome, Bharat. The floor is all yours. Bharat, the floor is all yours.
The camera. Just give me a sec. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right. Thanks, Gilbert, and thanks to the ACDF. It's great to partner with them. So what I thought was today I'd walk you through CSIS and who we are and what we do and how we fit into the whole cyber security space. How do I move the slides along?
The arrow button. Here you go. Just click the arrow button. Just click the up and down button. The arrow, the end, home and end button.
Gilbert, I think I have a problem moving the slides.
Okay, fine. I'll move it for you. I'll move it for you. There you go.
Okay.
You can go ahead. I will move the slides for you, Bharat.
Okay, let's look at it. So, see what we have. So basically, and one of the reasons that is related to the scale. What is also important here is that we are independent in the sense that whatever research, whatever policies, outputs we have are extremely independent. They're not influenced by anybody else. And then we also have a global presence, which helps because then we can have a view on both global and regional issues and then cross-pollinate this information from one region to another and bring best practices across the board. I think it's a problem, Gilbert, with this slide, so I'll just go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, I can move the slide for you. I can move the slide for you.
Okay. Just move it to slide 3.
Hello, Bharat. I'll move the slides for you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Your connection. Hello?
Thanks.
Yeah. Can you check your connection? Hello?
So
if you can hear us. We get back in one minute. Our next session is going to be a live interview with Bonnie Punya of BBC and Craig Jones, Director of Interpol. Our next session is going to be a live interview with Bonnie Punya of BBC and Craig Jones, Director of Interpol.
To be during this conversation. Craig, let's jump into it. The theme is
you are totally muted.
Thank you, everybody, for allowing me another opportunity to come back on and spend some time with you.
I don't know.
If I just go back to your opening point, though, Bonnie, when you said about we're responsible, law enforcement are responsible for the safety side of it. It's not just down to law enforcement, I think, is a point I'd just like to put out there to start with, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit later on. It's a joint responsibility. There's an industry responsibility in here, and also there's a user responsibility. So it's like a triangle effect, effectively. We're much stronger as the three together than trying to do it all individually. From the Interpol side of things, as I said earlier on the presentation this morning, we represent 194 member countries. We're a little bit like the United Nations. We're an intergovernmental neutral organisation, so we don't get involved in the politics or anything like that. We're purely for the law enforcement within the member countries. Our mandate for the Global Cybercrime Programme is coming up, hopefully you can see it in the corner behind me, but it's about reducing the global impact of cybercrime and protecting communities for a safer world. So there's a number of different elements to that. First of all, we talk about reducing.
But at least this session is playing, so
how can we stop physical crime in a sense?
There's a session playing, the one we had last year.
Many hundreds of years, we still have violent crime, we still have thefts, etc. That still goes on. So if we had something as a mandate to say we're going to stop cybercrime, that wouldn't be realistic. Also, the global impact, because as you've seen today through nearly all of the presentations and the speakers from industry and partners, this is a global, and I wouldn't even say it's phenomenal. It is just the nature of what we're dealing with now. The interconnectivity has made the reach and scope on the one hand. I'm sat here in Singapore at the moment.
I hope that young boy
will not see friends in Africa, and we've got a worldwide audience. So that connectivity side of it is brilliant. But the infrastructure can also be taken advantage of, as we've seen. The normal crime types are commodity-based, so we look at drug dealing, firearms, human trafficking, child sexual exploitation. It is a commodity-based type of crime. It's a physical crime a lot of the time, and that's what policing we're used to dealing with. However, all those crime types do have an online element to them now as well, effectively, because people have been using the phones, the computers, to help them and enable them to commit crime. But then when we look specifically at cybercrime, that's the type of crime types we just heard about on the last presentation there, where the cyber criminals, organised crime groups, and let's be honest about some of this, some of them aren't that clever, but effectively now what's happened is, because of the tools that are out there so freely available, you can create these, as we saw earlier, the fake sites that can fool people. And as human beings, there is a certain amount of naivety sometimes in what we do. So sometimes if we're out late at night, we might not walk down a certain street because we wouldn't think it's very safe, even though it's the quickest route home. When we're online, maybe we don't quite have that same mindset. We look for ease of accessibility. We look for the deals that are out there as well, and normally if it's too good to be true, it is too good to be true. So the other part of our mandate is protect communities for a safer world. So how can we look to prevent crime and cybercrime effectively? Again, a lot of the people speaking earlier have given good demonstrations about how they can protect people from becoming victims of crime. But also there's some onus on us as well about, when we're online, some, certain habits, some certain steps that we can take. But, a lot of us, and I'll include myself in that, we are not computer experts. We do not understand the pure binary ones and zeros, etc., and everything like that. We just want to get from A to B or purchase something. That's what we want to use the internet for. And that's why I said, coming back to that sort of triangle, that's where we need to work very closely with industry about protecting ourselves as well. So how can we protect ourselves when we're online, whether that's service providers or whether that's websites we're going on to or companies we're going on to? How do we actually know we're being protected? When we're entering our bank details, is there something on our computer? Is there not something on our computer? Is the site going on to, is that a true site or not a true site? So part of our program as well is building the capabilities and capacity of law enforcement in order to help them, first of all, prevent crime, but also help and identify opportunities where they can work in the communities and prevent people becoming victims. We do that through a number of different ways, through our projects, We've just done a global cyber awareness campaign as part of the COVID-19 piece over 4 weeks. And there's lots of different ways we can do that. So effectively, what we try and do is support all of our 194 member countries around some capability and capacity building, but also around data and information, and that's one of the key parts to that. So that's that aggregation, and as we said, it's the local to global. So trying to aggregate up that local data set into a global set, and then combining that with other data sets. So we have private partners where we get data and information from. We then add that to the police data. We have that with our analysts as well, and we go through those data sets. We look for those unique identifiers. We look for those different scams. We look for everything that we possibly can. So it's a bit like, you know, our normal policing, where meticulously going through, trying to gather all that intelligence, and then we then try and put that into an operational sense. Now, we don't do the investigations. We're not allowed to under our mandate. We have to support and coordinate that. But again, that's really powerful for us, because we might not get right down into the weeds, but we've got this sort of overview, and we can help coordinate, whereby we might have some victims in a number of countries. We might have the infrastructure in another country. We might have the cashing out and payments going through a different sort of network. And then the criminals might be somewhere else as well. And we might have a couple of national law enforcement bodies, you know, investigating that. So our job there is very much to coordinate that activity.
Right. And Craig, looking at this COVID period, a lot of people are spending considerably a lot more time online. What are some of the key trends that you observe as far as cybercrime is concerned in Africa?
So I think we've seen a couple of key trends. We've effectively seen an increase in reporting, and I'm going to choose my words quite carefully here. So when I say an increase in reporting, it doesn't mean the crime's gone up, because quite a lot of times cybercrime is not reported to the police. You know, we all, you know, get these various emails, we get the text messages, and we just delete them or just ignore them. But effectively, that's an attempt from someone, and we wouldn't necessarily report that to police. We've also had it where someone is scammed out of some money and the bank refunds them. So then again, that might not be reported to police. So I think we've seen an increase in reporting, but that is a lot to do with people becoming more aware of the scams going on and things like that as well. We saw a lot of initial setups of you know, fake websites and things like that, attracting people to say, you know, COVID-19 was the lure or the hook, if you like. So people were going onto those sites to either look to buy face masks, personal protective equipment, etc. They were logging on, they were giving their banking details, they were paying for goods, and then those goods wouldn't arrive. And that's quite a sort of straightforward scam, if you like, which taken advantage of a situation. We also looked at potentially some ransomware attacks. So what that was where someone might click on a link in an email. It might bring some malware into the system effectively. It would encrypt a whole bunch of files within a business, and then a ransomware would come up and say, pay X amount of Bitcoins and we will decrypt your files. So again, we had a lot more of those reported. Now, I'm not saying at the moment those are on the increase, but again, it's because a lot of people were going online and seeing that come up. There was some talk about it being linked particularly to the health sector, so the hospitals and things like that. We saw a number of instances around the world and certain sort of ransomware chains, and we've got some ongoing operations investigations at the moment supporting member countries in that area. And again, it's the same ones, that the sort of money attacks as well, because that's what they're after quite a lot of the time. It's the financial type attacks and going after the money effectively.
And Craig, obviously, there's a lot more mobile connectivity on the African continent. Mobile money has skyrocketed. The use on the African continent compared to anywhere else in the world. Do you see these as presenting mobile-specific cyber crimes, and what are some of the ways of mitigating that?
Yeah, but we saw that previously. Last year we did a sort of global to regional threat assessment. So again, this comes back to this sort of local to regional to global, and then global to regional to local. So, you know, we might think, oh, actually there's not a lot of different in countries and regions, but quite rightly, as you said, in Africa it was very much highlighted the sort of mobile banking apps, and people doing a lot of their finances online, but also sharing phones as well. So they were downloading different applications on their phones, maybe not always genuine applications. Again, we know that a lot of the criminals out there will develop these apps to steal information and harvest information. So I think in the sort of Africa region, as you said, there was a lot of people using phones and the mobile networks. They are potentially more susceptible to that. And again, as we move into this sort of virtual currency piece as well, looking at how we do our banking online, or whether we're still using like traditional banking apps, or whether we're moving more towards virtual currencies as well, which is, it's exciting in some ways. It's new ways of being able to do business as well, but also like anything, it comes with risks at times as well.
Right. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the law enforcement bit. And I've gotten quite a lot of concern about the working relationship between Interpol and police in specific jurisdictions. Could you just paint to us a picture of how that relationship is in the quest to enforce the law?
So I think, as I said earlier, we're a neutral organisation. So I'm a law enforcement official originally from United Kingdom. So they law enforcement, like anything, there's geopolitical natures to countries and who countries trust and want to work with. So previously in the UK, we did a lot of investigations with our colleagues in the US, Five Eyes partners, so those are Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and then also within Europe. So quite a sort of Western sort of investigation type, and then others as well. Now I'm working Europol, Europol, Freudian slip there. Now I'm at Interpol. It's fantastic. I can go and have a conversation with any member country. I was in China last year speaking to the Chinese, looking about how we can develop capabilities with them, how they can develop capabilities with us and our member countries. I was in the US as well last year. I was supposed to be in Russia in July. I was there last year at the International Crime Congress. So, building those ties and those relationships, because part of our role is the coordination. And that's really, really key to this. So this is how can Interpol play that coordination piece with those countries that have got good capabilities, good capacity. The criminals might be in a hard to reach jurisdiction for one or other reason for one of the countries. And the infrastructure might be in another area, which is hard to reach. So very much I see our role as around, connecting policing for a safer world, which, funny enough, I've just used the sort of vision statement of Interpol there. But this goes back to, Interpol's been around since, as a concept and a form, since about 1917, 1918. So well over 100 years as an organisation. I think someone said to me, if you tried to create this type of organisation nowadays, we would struggle, for numerous different reasons. But I think because of the long history of Interpol, also the neutrality of it as well, we don't, within our constitution, under Article 3, we can't get involved in conflicts, or either political or military or racial or anything like that. So that gives us a certain degree of protection, but also our member countries as well. Within my team, the Chinese office has just gone back recently, so hopefully we'll get a replacement for Lily soon as well. We've got people from Israel, UK, hopefully someone's going to be coming in from the US soon as well, Nigeria. And again, we work very closely in our regions as well. So we sort of divide the world up into 5 regions. So we do take a regional approach into how we work with those member countries. But each of our 194 member countries has a national central bureau. And that's one of the key parts to how we disseminate our information into those countries, but also how we receive information on police information effectively.
Past station we had with Craig Jones of Interpol. Back to you, Bharat. Could you take the stage?
Hopefully you can hear me now. Can you folks hear me?
We can hear you perfectly well. Go ahead.
All right. Let me move the slides as well then. Okay, so in the sense, what I was saying before was that we are an independent think tank, and we are very focused on cybersecurity. And what makes us unique, of course, is that we have a global presence. So we have a point of view which is global, regional, and also sometimes specific to a country. So that helps us understand and deal with problems in a country, and then sometimes carry over best practices to other places. So why are we doing what we do, and why is it important? We believe that if we have an open cyberspace, it essentially leads to innovation, which brings all of the other things, free flows of idea, information, expression, and so on. The other thing we've realized is, especially after the advent of the internet, it has sort of leveled the playing field. Previously, only people with access to the education or to a large extent capital were able to build businesses. Now, with the availability of information almost everybody, almost anybody is able to build a business, and if the idea is good, they could run with it. And this also transforms, of course, the way we produce and consume services, both corporate and consumer services, and what the government provides its citizens. So from that standpoint, we believe that cyberspace should always be open. And any threat is, we believe, a threat to the creation of global wealth. And this is especially so in places like Africa, in the countries of Africa, which are now starting to grow really fast. And this could potentially threaten that growth. So how do we do this? We essentially do this by collaborating with people. So it's advocacy, but then any kind of solution has to be a collaboration between various parties. It's governments, industry, the media, academia, of course, non-profits who do similar work, and of course the people. Which means a lot of information and training. So that brings me to our vision, which is essentially to make sure that cyberspace remains open for innovation and free flow of ideas. And this ties directly into our mission, which is to conduct high quality, credible, independent research and provide innovative and focused policy recommendations and initiatives. This could be to corporates, to governments, or to work with other partners. What does help, we've realized, is our focus on cybersecurity. So what we essentially do is we provide an independent platform where all of the various groups, typically stakeholders like the government or industry, media, and academia, can essentially engage, bring forth the ideas, the issues. We also provide briefings to top experts in the government, industry, media, and so on. We take up leadership in driving policy discussions. We provide commentary about and research analysis on issues, cyberspace issues, especially the current ones. And in general, we also do work very closely with media and act as a resource for them to help spread the message that we should be taking cybersecurity problems more seriously. And to do this, we have a lot of capabilities which encompass several disciplines. On one side, it could be data protection or privacy, then to cybercrime, then some of the new technology tools like AI or blockchain, or working just with information and intelligence, and so on. So this is a partial list. What's interesting is, in the last couple of years, cyber threats and cyber attacks have actually gone up. especially after the virus, COVID came along, and a lot more people started working from home, especially in professions where they could. And we've had a lot of corporate, breaches, hacking, and so on. And of late, we also see that happening with critical infrastructure and supply chain as well. So what do we do about this? So what is the path forward for us? So we believe that we should essentially collaborate to mitigate this threat. And this brings me back to what I said previously about the government, academia, media, and corporates all collaborating to try to solve this problem. And I think at the root of it initially is to exchange information, not only about threats, but also about best practices. And that pretty much brings me to the end of my presentation. So if you want any more information about CSIS or what we do and how we engage with governments or with other institutions, including with ACDF, please do reach out to me or to Gilbert. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
In case anyone has a question. So just the question mode is on. In case anyone has a question from the audience, you can share it with Bharat.
Not too many questions so far.
There's a question here, Bharat. Maybe you can take it. It came from maybe there's a question that came in here earlier. Maybe you want to try take it. So there's a question.
That is true. To some extent, that there might be a lack of opportunities. I think it's a combination of lack of investment so far for over several years, maybe. And also maybe some kind of a brain drain. So those are two main reasons why you might be in a position where you are. But having said that, I don't believe that is an excuse at all. Just take a look at what's happened in financial services, right? There were limitations there in the way people could access these resources, and somebody just came up using the limited resources. They came up with what Safaricom did initially. And today I think more people have telephone connections than bank accounts. I think it's almost double when I last checked. So the point is that yes, there seem to be a lack of opportunities, but that is where innovation kicks in, right? And that is where the whole idea of open cyberspace is, right? You have a lot of information on there. You can always find innovative ways of solving the problems and build that into a business model. Okay. Any other questions?
You responded to it. In case they have any questions, I think they can reach out to you. And you provided the details.
All right.
Thank you so much, Bharat.
And sorry for the problems I had previously.
No, it's fine. Thank you so much.
I look forward to the rest of the sessions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bharat. Have a good one.
All right.
So, ladies and gentlemen, as we transition to our next session, our next session will be a panel. And just to show you what to expect next is a session that you will see. So after this, you will be able to have a panel, our next session. We started earlier. So the next session we will be having is with David Sear, who will join us shortly. Okay. David, let me put the slide on for you, David. So, David Sia, welcome. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you. All right, guys, just give me a minute while I share my screen. Yeah. All right, guys, do you see the screen? Hello, testing? Yeah.
Maybe you can put it in full mode.
All right, I'm going to put it on full mode now.
Yeah, or I can share it for you if there's an issue.
All right, no worries. Let me just share again. Okay, could you share? Yeah, for me.
Yes, let me share for you.
All right,
Yes,
very good. Okay, so thanks everybody. My name is David Sia, and I'm representing the Center for Strategic Cyberspace and International Studies. So next slide, please. So today, my topic is on extended detection and response in the cloud. And if you see that there is a lot of events leading up to this in the last 1 year because of COVID. We have all been working from home, and therefore there's an increase in digitalization. Next slide. And as a result, there is actually a lot of concerns about using the cloud from the digitalization. So what is the biggest concern in the cloud? Next. The biggest concern, in my personal opinion, is really the misconfigurations, which will be the top security risk. Today, we saw that there are multiple types of security risks that is out in the market today. One is through vulnerabilities, one is through ransomware. But I would say that from our research, the misconfigurations have become the top security risk. Next. And so far as the hyperscale cloud providers are concerned, we see Google, Alibaba, AWS, and Microsoft Azure actually doing a lot in this area of security. And we all know about the shared responsibility model of security. But insofar as the responsibility of the hyperscale cloud providers are concerned, next slide. We don't have to trouble ourselves too much in worrying that they are not secure, because in the past 5 years, there's only 2 service vulnerabilities combined from these 4 hyperscale providers that has resulted in exploitations. Next slide. Right. So if I look at the shared responsibility model, right, we know that there is a couple of attributes we need to control: data, application, operating system, virtualization, and infrastructure, as well as physical. And in this shared responsibility model, it essentially talks about the responsibility of securing one of these 6 attributes belonging to whether it is the cloud service provider or is it the end user itself. So if you can be using the most basic form of infrastructure, and that is the on-premise form that we all know today, right, where we are involved and we are responsible for securing the data, the application, the operating system, virtualization, infrastructure, and physical. Or we could be using IaaS model or infrastructure as a service model, which could be a hyperscale model, right? Whereby we rent instances from AWS or Google. And in that case, we will be only responsible for the first 3 elements: the data, the application, and the operating system, whereas we'll be responsible for that. And the hyperscale operator will be responsible for virtualization, infrastructure, and physical. Now, on the extreme model on the right, we could also be using the software as a service model, and that will be more simple for us because all we need to do is to secure the data. The application, OS, virtualization, infrastructure, and physical will be secured by the hyperscale operator. But regardless of the model, in all cases, the biggest problem that's plaguing this everybody is only one item, and that is the area of service configuration. If we had configured one of the hyperscale services wrongly, this would have resulted in an exploitable application that can be breached. And research has shown this to be one of the top security concerns. Now, if you look at Google Cloud, in the past 5 years, they've actually had paid, they had one configuration issue, and it was a very good thing. They found it through a bug bounty program. They paid the operator, the guy who was the the bug bounty guy found it, $100,000 as a bug bounty reward. And this essentially, they found that you can use a secure socket in Google Cloud Shell to elevate privileges. So effectively, you could be in a container and you could use this socket to give yourself expanded, elevated privileges to access all the rights within that container, which is pretty much a super user. So luckily, Google has a responsibility and immediately remediate this, so there's no major breach that's reported as a result. Now the second breach is the second configuration issue at the hyperscale level is in Microsoft Azure, whereby they found an unknown route to deployment server with an app. And this was actually also found early. So as a result, there's also no reported breaches. So it's very lucky for all of us. Yeah. So is therefore safe to say that at a hyperscale level, it is a very safe way to trust the responsibility of the security to the hyperscale operator. But more intriguingly, the hyperscale operators themselves, right, Google and Microsoft Azure, they have actually got so talented gurus developing their services. Why is it that such configuration errors still exist? Now, the reason is because a lot of times, higher order services that is developed by these operators are inheriting core services, which are most predominantly open source products. And because of the nature of open source products, and when you inherit, if there's a flaw in the base core service, the higher order service inherits that flaw. And therefore opens up a potential for misconfiguration. Now, if you are an end user and you build upon that higher order service, just accordingly, you inherit it as well. So therefore, on the community findings in the survey that was done, we found that 65 to 70% of all cloud security issues start with a misconfiguration. Now, how do you quantify that with facts and findings and examples? Now, this provides a list of all the data record exposed in the cloud over just the past 3 years alone. You can see that as a result of just one service misconfiguration, right? We've lost millions of records there. If your eyesight is good enough, you can see that there's one item that's not highlighted, capital one. That's the fourth name from below. The capital one breach has resulted in not one, but two misconfigurations. Now, this is worthy to discuss further, guys, because Capital One is an authority in the area of cloud. They are actually used by AWS as a reference customer as well. So they are all really talented gurus in using cloud, right? In spite of their expert status, they can still cause misconfiguration, not just one, two misconfigurations as well. So one of the things about using the cloud is that a lot of developers use the DevOps cycle, which is an infinity loop that shifts from left to right and back to left to right as well. And you have some changes, you deploy them in production. And when you find that there's a need to iterate and improve on your product, you actually shift back to the left, redevelop and redeploy again. So this rapid agile Scrum type kind of methodology has resulted in possibilities for errors as well. Why is that so? Because you need to deploy things fast, right? And fast is not necessarily, a bad thing, but it's just that sometimes you find errors and misconfigurations inside. But of course, most of the time, right, the gurus such as these folks will find the errors and they would take the opportunity to patch them in the next DevOps deployment cycle. But sometimes you will take days or hours, but that's what that's all hackers need. Just days or hours of a hole and a misconfiguration that allows them to exploit that misconfiguration vulnerability to get into the system, to do their ransomware stuff and to do their data breach stuff. Yeah. So why is this so? Because we're all humans and humans make mistakes, and a misconfiguration is a mistake, right? In any other words. And another way to look at it is because it's all about reality. In the last 1 year alone, the 4 hyperscale operators have deployed almost 5,000 new functionalities, 5,000 new service functionalities within their clouds, respectively. So if I were to look at it from the perspective of even the most talented developer, they find it very hard to catch up with these new advances in functionalities. You would have guides to teach you how to use it, but there will be some nuances that perhaps, if not interpreted correctly, would result in misconfigurations. So the goal of cybersecurity predominantly is to ensure that what you build works as intended and only as intended. And if you don't do that, it is a misconfiguration, right? So security is another aspect of building well, but not just a standalone activity, okay? So in spite of modest challenges, right, because the rapid state of adoption of new applications, the DevOps cycle, the agile methodology, and the rapid increase in the number of service functionalities over the course of the years as well, we are prone to misconfiguration. So is there anything else we can do? The answer is yes. And are we sure? Yes, of course, right? We can always check on the configurations, but so this is where I would like to take a pause first, right? Let's think through, right? Because it seems like a no-win situation whereby misconfigurations is the most serious and the most prevalent security breach, right? Issues that is plaguing us today. How do we solve that issue, and how do we just make sure that our applications are safe? For one way is to secure the application. Another way is to detect if an exploit is happening. And one way of looking at it is really to provide more visibility in the systems. Another is to put in security controls that help teams build better in the cloud. So if I look at the DevOps cycle, right, in the development area, on the left side, if we shift left a little bit just to view it from the left-hand side, we could actually do a little bit more in terms of application source code security. But if we shift a little bit to the right, when it's deployed, how do we monitor the kind of visibility that is needed, the kind of detection capabilities that is needed? Right? So that is the next second part of the presentation I'm going to be talking about. Meaningful visibility is critical, but another challenge, it's too difficult. If you look at the statistics, right, the amount of data, right, individual security, amount of incidents that happens in a log file, in a security log file, is almost 10,000 incidents a day. So imagine if you're a SOC or a data network monitoring operator, how do you react to 10,000 event alerts? And not all of them are malicious, right? Some of them may be false positives, some of them are just alerts for your information, but just 10,000 is, again, humanly impossible to monitor. And another statistic is in every enterprise, there is more than 25 different kinds of security technologies inside. So your problem is exacerbated twofold. One is different technologies that don't talk to one another because you have silos of visibility. And not just silos of visibility, every silo comes with tens of thousands of alerts. How do you manage them, and how do you ensure that you have a good way of looking at your security threats? One way of visualizing it is if you're an enterprise security operator and what you want to do is to look for that one piece of malicious traffic. Imagine, right, in this human population crowd in this stadium here, only one of them is malicious, but every day you receive all these tens of thousands of alerts. How do you pinpoint that that particular person or that particular incident is the malicious one? And with digitalization, right, the amount of data has exploded. The number of applications has increased exponentially, and we are now, looking at a lot more security events as well. So the problem has exacerbated multifold. So therefore, what is needed is the ability to do correlation and analytics across different security technologies. And what is possible is in the area of aggregating and correlating all this information across your endpoints, your email, your server, your operating technologies, your network, and the cloud, so that you can see, right, and correlate and look at the different kinds of challenges that is coming in. Yeah. So the concept is called XDR, or Extended Detection and Response. Basically, what it does is it offers you a single console to view endpoint telemetry, email telemetry, server telemetry, operations tech telemetry, network telemetry, and cloud telemetry that is correlated out of the box. So the keyword here is out of the box, because a lot of us who are operating security technologies, right, all those mentioned on average, an enterprise has got 25 different security technologies in their organization. Now, this particular way of the current mode integration is all about using a SIEM, or Security Incident Event Monitor, to integrate all these events and find a correlation between malicious, use correlation to find malicious events. But more often than not, the integration of the SIEM has not lived up to its promise, and therefore we are not able to find that fidelity or that amount of, that pinpoint, that dot among the masses, right? Remember that stadium analogy that I gave earlier on. So just again, another pause. We talked about the challenges of the cloud, because configurations can cause errors, and we talked about trying to monitor all those particular exploits that's coming in to exploit on all those configuration errors, and we talked about the too much visibility, right? We have really too many data that is floating around across too many different silos. Now, that is not just the only problem. Another problem is that the security landscape is always changing. In addition to exponentially explosive data, which means the number of incidents that you need to monitor increase every day, right? The complexity of the organization's network posture changes as well over years. So let's take an example of this. Just take an example of an organization. They could be just starting up on day one, and in day one they decided, hey, let's build our own data center with our one rack of servers. We can operate our own infrastructure and our own application, right? But as days goes by, things need to expand. They manage to expand overseas, so they set up remote branches and remote sites. And as they find that volumes increase, they need to burst to the public cloud, or maybe for data sovereignty issues in some regimes that they need to operate in, they find that they need to have a service provider and use different public clouds and private clouds as well. As a result, the number of complexity attributes increases. So let's just count them again, right? Service misconfiguration, number of new services that is provided by hyperscale, just 5,000 new services just last year, right? The amount of events that the average enterprise views a day, 10,000. The number of security technologies that an enterprise has on average, 25. And the fact that they all exist in different silos. And now we have this other issue whereby the landscape of the network posture changes over the years too. So all these changes all really makes life a lot more complicated. Therefore, today's CISO actually is faced with a lot of limitations. Data overload is a key problem today, and coupled by the shortage in cybersecurity staffing, it makes us really in big trouble in trying to monitor and look for events that is relevant to us. That's because we have limited visibility, so we need a lot more manpower, right? And of course, there's budget constraints as well. So therefore, in ending, I'd like to just highlight that Gartner in 2020 last year published a list of security trends. And the number one security trend that Gartner talked about is a concept called extended detection and response. Yeah. So extended detection and response capabilities are now emerging to improve detection accuracy and security. What it does is that they would aggregate, right, telemetry, which is the data, coming from all the security sensors like the EDR sensor, email and web gateway, CASB, identity access management, DLP, firewall, right, into a data lake. They, of course, would do data normalization and data correlation. But what makes this so different is that this all comes pre-made out of the box. And if we are talking about having all these concepts of all these events out of the box, we have solved all our problems. In fact, very simplistically put, the problem of too much data, right? Data overload has been reduced because data is now all correlated from all your multiple sources of technology. Limited visibility. Now that problem has been solved as well because, hey, what they have done is now actually provide a high fidelity data lake that is correlated to only give you the relevant information, meaning that only alerts that are relevant to you that is malicious will pop up and will pop up for you to manage. Yeah? And finally, limited budget. Because this is built out of the box, there's no need for costly customizations. Yeah. So undoubtedly, I feel that this is one area that for us in the cybersecurity practice, we could look at to make sure that extended detection and response capabilities are well placed within our organization. So with that, I'd like to end today's presentation. Again, thanks to the organizers of this forum for inviting the Center for Strategic Cyberspace and International Studies. Thanks, everybody. I really enjoyed my time here.
The question session is open. If there are any questions, we pass over to Q&A. So the audience, if you have any questions, you can just post them and David can respond. Yeah, you still have some few minutes, David.
Do I give training? No, unfortunately, I'm not a full-time trainer. I actually provide, do my own business, and I also work for an organization as well. Online resources, yeah, I think if you look at Gartner, right, there is a lot of literature on the concept of extended detection and response. And one of the things that I find very useful is really the AWS certification training. They provide a lot of certification training online that is free. And that actually gives me a lot of insight personally as well. I've also gone for EC Council trainings as well, like the Certified CISO course. There are some courses like the Cloud Security Alliance. They provide certification in cloud security. These are absolutely great resources for us to tackle if we want to embark on this securing our cloud security journey. All right, no further questions. Back to you, Gilbert.
Another question. You have another question, just check. I don't know whether you saw it.
I saw, okay, let me just refresh. I have two questions. Do you give training? And another one is online resources, right? I've answered both. Is there something that I missed out?
Yes, there's another one. Let me.
Can you take someone for mentoring in cybersecurity? Okay, I mentioned that I don't give training. And how does an industry with lots of regulatory compliance work with the cloud when they are ultimately responsible for all issues? Now, I think that the regulatory compliance is very much a sovereign issue. Every sovereign territory has their own requirements for cloud security. But over and above everything, I think data residency requirements is really the biggest issue today. And if you have solved that data residency issue requirement, let's say if the hyperscale cloud operators in one guise or form, right, they actually reside their data centers within their territory, within your own territory, you have solved the issue, then you take care of the shared responsibility issue, because it depends on the way you use it. Most of us will use it in a infrastructure and as a service mode, which means you need to take care of your data and your application security and your own operating system. But the virtualization, the infrastructure, and the data center will be taken care of by the platform operator. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a last question on how do you ensure visibility on AWS and Azure?
Right. Yeah, so AWS itself, I know that they have a way to look at visibility. They also provide a service for you to monitor security events as well. And of course, you can always go onto the AWS marketplace, where they sell actually plenty of monitoring tools and what we call. I talked about configuration being the number one problem all of us have when it comes to developing on the cloud, right? If you solve your configuration issues, you have solved most of your issues, in fact. Yeah. Of course, the other basic hygienes like putting an anti-malware on your AWS instance is important, but the more important bit is to prevent exploits from vulnerabilities that you introduce by misconfigurations. As you remember from the survey that I do, 65 to 70% of all issues are as a result of misconfigurations. So AWS has a framework called the well-architected review framework, right? Whereby they make sure that your applications residing on AWS is well-architected. So that's one thing, right? Make sure that you get yourself well-architected review. And the second one is, I mentioned, going into the marketplace and getting marketplace and buying marketplace security that addresses configuration monitoring, meaning as you configure, right, this particular piece of software can tell you whether your configuration is secured or not.
Any other questions? I think there's the last one. I think you responded. How does the industry with compliance? I think you already done that.
Yeah, I did that. Yeah, because there were actually two. There were actually two tabs: the Q&A tab and the moderated tab. So I've addressed both. Yeah. Very good. So,
they can reach out to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, everybody. Yep, looking forward to you guys connecting to me on LinkedIn. My name is David Siah, spelled S-I-A-H. Right, see you guys.
We'll be moving to our next session. Before then, we'll have a short session break as our speakers on board for the next session.
Point and a pandemic point, but it's also an opportunity as well. So there's an opportunity where we've seen a massive acceleration in people going online. So all of a sudden, there's been about exponentially bang, not everybody, but a lot of people are now working from home as well. So that brings challenges into it, but also it brings in opportunities. So, I haven't worked from home for over a year since I've started at Interpol because of the nature of our work. We're in the office or we're traveling. Whereas now I've been working from home. And if I'm really, really honest, I have not missed the traveling aspect to this. Being able to come down and turn my laptop on and access anywhere in the world, it's been fantastic. But from a project side of things, part of my last role in the United Kingdom was was supporting our national cybersecurity programme, and we had a £45 million budget per annum for law enforcement. Now that's even in the UK, that's a serious amount of money. But actually, the United Kingdom were investing 1.9 billion over 5 years into cyber, if you like. Coming into Interpol, yes, we have to look for funding for our projects. But again, with my programme manager head on, I do that on a prioritised basis. So effectively, we've got a number of different priorities and objectives within our programme. So first one is to develop that better understanding of the cybercrime threat landscape. Now we do that with private partners and also with law enforcement. So we have a thing called Project Gateway, which allows us to bring data and information in directly from private partners. We have our own rules of processing data. So we have a separate book which goes through how we have to handle our data. So if anybody knows about ISO and those sort of pieces around data, or GDPR, we have our own rules around that, and we're heavily monitored on that. We have separate departments which, you know, audit us, make sure we do it correctly, make sure, as we said earlier, the architecture is correct, we're storing it correctly, and things like that. But we've got sort of private partners. So some of those, for example, are threat intelligence companies. Some of those are from the sort of financial sector, or some of the sectors that might be impacted from cybercrime. So again, we look to utilise those partnerships and that creation of that ecosystem as well, which helps support us.
Right. So let's get back to the trends we talked about earlier on. Yeah. Obviously, phishing has been a common one on the African space. But looking at the work you do, what's the trend like on, say, sovereign or state cyber attacks, and are there lessons that we can learn from countries that have dealt with it better than others?
So I think when we look at sort of nation state attacks, that's an area we don't get involved in. That's a government side. And again, I know different countries are set up differently. So some it's a government responsibility, some it's a dual law enforcement and government responsibility. Certainly, as I said, I came back to our Article 3 around being the neutrality side of it. So we don't get involved with any politics side. We don't get involved, not just the politics side, sorry, on the, I'll try to think of the other things now, military side and things like that as well. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's a very clear definition. So once we get a cyber incident in, we will do an assessment of it. We will support the member country. So it might be a member country comes to us, so we've got a ransomware attack on our health sector. We will start looking at that. If it comes and looks like it is hostile state or near state actor or government attack, that does not fall within our remit. So very much then we would just revert back to the country and say, look, we can't assist you at this time because we have to maintain our neutrality side of that.
Right. And earlier on, we had a conversation about the development of jurisprudence and the fact that innovation or cyber attacks are developing faster than the laws to curb that. Is this frustrating for you?
So again, we look at, we're dealing with boundaries, aren't we, all the time? So we're dealing with national boundaries. Within legislation, there's national boundaries. We're looking at trying to harmonise some of the legislation so we can exchange evidence and things like that as well. Because obviously, if the laws are harmonised, then what I would refer to as a cyber attack or theft of data in one country would be the same in another country. So if you have that harmonised, if it's not quite harmonised, that's when it becomes a little bit more difficult for law enforcement to exchange that data and information. And we have a process, an MLAT process, which is like a judicial process that we go through about exchanging data. I know there's a number of sort of conventions that are touted around trying to bring countries together under certain conventions. I know in Africa, you're looking at the Malibu one, which is not a convention as yet because I don't think it's been ratified, but also there's the Budapest one. But when you look at these sort of conventions, there's a number of similarities to them, and the United Nations are doing a huge amount of work in that space effectively to try and align that. When it does come back to doing the investigations side and the frustrations, I think, yes, because there is this piece around law enforcement, you know, the courts quite often still sit, don't they? We're still quite paper-based in the courts. So when we look at the digital evidence and trying to present that in a way that, you know, the judiciary understands that, the jury understands that, and, you know, this is going to take quite a while still to develop effectively. When you look at, you know, the side.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving back to stage, and our next session, as our speakers on board, is data protection regulation in Africa, challenges and perspectives, and the learning lessons from Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. So allow me to present on stage our speakers. I believe Rose is already here, and as we wait for the rest to on board, Rose, you can join the floor. And the other speakers, you can also join if you're available. So, welcome, Rose. Hope you can hear me.
I can. Hope you can hear me as well. And thank you so much for having me on this session. I look forward to engaging with the other two panelists and yourself during this session.
Sure. Thank you so much. And just waiting for the other panelists to join us.
Sure.
As they join, we can just maybe kick off, I think, so that we don't waste time. So maybe I'll give you the chance just to introduce yourself to our audience so that at least they know who you are.
Okay, lovely. My name is Rose Macero. I am a lawyer by profession. I currently serve as a legal policy and regulatory advisor to the Data Commissioner in the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, which was established in November of last year. I am also a legal policy and regulatory advisor to the Cabinet Secretary of ICT, Innovation and Youth Affairs in Kenya, CS Joe Musheru. I am a privacy professional. I'm a certified information privacy professional, as well as certified information privacy manager, having done my master's in security and cybersecurity, specifically with the focus on security or international security, but also looking at privacy as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose, for the wonderful introduction. As we wait for the prof as well to join us, being also in the legal profession, your fellow colleagues, they also have legal matters as well in court as well to deal with. But I just want us to start, even as they join us, so that we don't waste time. So, you know, our question, or rather our topic today, we're looking at the issue of data protection. From where you sit, I know you have, you're sitting in the, the ministry, and also you're sitting on, with a new office was just established on data protection. Maybe what exactly, can you give us a perspective, for example, with regards to Kenya? Where are we with regards to data protection, and what exactly are some of the work we are doing in that area? Back to you.
Okay, for me to give a brief overview as to where we are as Kenya in data protection, I think I need to go back and look at the policy, rationales for why we actually do have a data protection office. So some of you who might be Kenyan may be aware, and the ones that don't, I will speak to a very broad background for why data protection is important in the Kenyan landscape. So as Kenya, we have something known as a Vision 2030, and the Vision 2030 is effectively a visionary document which seeks to promote the implementation of policies for broad-based inclusive growth. And effectively, the Vision 2030 is an overarching goal to catapult Kenya to a middle-income economy by 2030. The vision is premised on a number of pillars. They are economic, social, and political pillars, which are anchored in the creation and enhancement of a stable macroeconomic environment, and continuous governance reforms, enhanced equity and poverty reduction and wealth creation. The vision is effectively implemented in 5-year phases known as a medium-term plans. In this current medium-term plan, which is MTP3, it prioritizes what we call the Big Four agenda, which calls for an increase in GDP attributable to manufacturing, affordable housing, food and nutritional security, as well as achieving 100% universal health coverage. One of the things that the MTP3 acknowledges is that ICT is a key, if not the key, enabler for achieving these the Big Four agenda. And so it has called for ICT sector to also promote socioeconomic growth, and in this sense, ICT is seen as a critical driver to the achievement of Kenya's socioeconomic development. On the back of this, the Ministry of ICT, Innovation and Youth Affairs established a number of documents and policies to emphasize the importance of technology and innovation in Kenya, and specific when it comes to leapfrogging her economy. One key document that I'll speak about, so the three documents I'll just touch on very briefly, is a National ICT Policy and Guidelines of 2020, the Digital Economy Blueprint for Africa, which was launched at the Smart Africa Summit in Rwanda in 2019 by His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta. And then there is a draft digital economy strategy for Kenya, which is a 5-year implementational roadmap to operationalize the digital economy blueprint. When the blueprint was being done, what it looked like is, what is it that we'll see Kenya being transformed to Silicon Savannah, which it is reputable for, being that it is a very big innovation hub in Africa and globally. And we looked at how exactly is it that Kenya can build a vibrant digital economy, and we looked at, I think there's usually a house to go with it, but there were 5 pillars that were recognized, which is digital government, which is very broad-based facing, which talks about digital service delivery. So if any of you interact with the Kenyan government, even if it's for visa application, you would have interacted with something known as e-Citizen, which is effectively a one-stop shop for government services online. So it's looking to ensure that there is a robust structure for that. So then you look at digital business, which looks at fintechs, digital trade, e-commerce, and the like. Then it looks at infrastructure, and this is not just digital infrastructure, but how can roads and fiber cables coexist without one necessarily being destroyed for the benefits of the other? And this is effectively to enable a ubiquitous connectivity across the country. Then we look at innovation ecosystems and how can we build that. So in terms of IP protection, but also ensuring that there is an ecosystem where startups can actually thrive, and we can have development challenges addressed, or solutions to development challenges in Kenya and Africa broadly. And the last one is digital skills and values. But with those 5 pillars that were identified, there were key issues that were picked out in terms of legal and regulatory protections that would need to be present to ensure that we've got a safe and robust digital economy. And one of those was data protection. you know that data protection, obviously, or data specifically, has been hailed as, or a very cliche phrase, which allow me to use, has been hailed as the oil of our times. And so there's a need to regulate how exactly that can be done, how people can ethically and legally collect and use and process information regarding to individuals. And this touches on the right to privacy that is also espoused in the Constitution of Kenya under Article 31, and specifically 31C and D, that looks at the right to privacy when it comes to information of Kenyan citizens and residents. So on the back of that, the Data Protection Act was developed and went through extensive public participation before being enacted in the 25th of November 2019. Unfortunately, we had to wait almost a year for the office to actually be established, and that was done on the 16th of November 2020 when the Data Commissioner, Madam Immaculate Kasait, was sworn into office. During that time, we've just undertaken more of an awareness campaign, as well as building the actual office. And on the 15th of January of this year, the Cabinet Secretary, Joe Mucheru, also established or gazetted a task force to develop general regulations, which effectively give an implementational roadmap or guideline as to how the Data Protection Act will actually be operationalized, so that if there is enforcement procedures, there's clarity in how those enforcement procedures will be undertaken. If there's issues in regards to certain compliance and rights, what exactly data processors and controllers need to be aware of. And there have been 3 draft regulations that have been developed since the task force was established. And we have undertaken as well quite extensive, I think, unfortunately, due to COVID, we weren't able to carry out face-to-face awareness campaigns or public participation sessions. But we, from April to May, we undertook, I think, more than 24 public participation sessions to get the views of the public on these 3 draft regulations. So the first one is a draft Data Protection General Regulations 2021, that looks at the procedures for enforcement of rights of data subjects, as well as elaborating on the duties and obligations of data controls and data processors that process data of Kenyans and people resident in Kenya. And then the second is a data protection registration of data controls and data processors, which just looks at the procedures that will be adopted by the office in registering data controls and data processors as per the Data Protection Act. And the third one is the Data Protection Compliance and Enforcement Regulations, which outlines the complaints procedures, as well as gives the office or guidance to the office, as well as those referring to the regulations, guidance on how the office will be implementing the provisions of the Act where it comes to enforcement and issuance of fines, and also the procedures in regards to appealing to the High Court for any decision that is made by the Data Commissioner.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think you made a good background on the Data Protection Act. And, I wish the gentlemen, I hope they're joining us from Nigeria and South Africa. I mean, the question that maybe also comes to mind, position where we sit now. How do we ensure, for example, like multinationals, being big multinational social media companies that are now operating in our territories, how do we ensure also the data of our citizens, also in Africa, are protected? I give an example. I'm sure you're aware of the Cambridge Analytica issue. So the question comes in: are our governments lacking, the teeth to be able to bite, or the regulator in this case? How do we ensure? How sure are we that our data is protected when, in these cases, we realize that multinationals that can come in and operate in our territories, but they're not held accountable with regards to the protection of our data? Maybe what's your take on that?
Okay, so it's a very interesting question, and I'll answer it on 2 fronts. The first one is on the legal aspect, so it's effectively what the Act says. And in this regard, our Data Protection Act in Kenya mentions that everyone who collects information regarding to Kenyans or people resident in Kenya is bound to comply by the Act itself. So this applies to multinationals, be they in Kenya or based in Kenya or elsewhere in the Act. They are covered and should comply with the provisions of the Data Protection Act. The second issue that is covered in the Act is that there is an obligation of or an allowance for the data commissioner to engage with other data protection authorities globally to ensure that it can enforce the provisions of the Act, even where the data controllers or data processors aren't resident in Kenya itself. So that legally gives some teeth to data protection authorities or the Office of Data Protection Commissioner. However, there's that aspect of, the power has been given for a data protection commissioner to engage with other data protection authorities. How effective is that? And I can see in Africa that there is already a group of data protection authorities that are working together to ensure that there is compliance and to ensure that even as we're dealing with multinationals, there's a coordinated approach when it comes to how to relate to those multinationals, which I think, even though there's no particular framework or legal framework to guide this, I still think that's a very big achievement for African data protection authorities. Globally, I think it is up to organizations, especially data protection authorities, whether they be in Africa or they be in Europe or they be in Asia, for us to actually have a coordinated approach for how we deal with things, because data is not, it's transient. So it won't just sit in one country forever. And a Kenyan individual or data controller can access information that relates to Europeans, can access information that relates to people on the Asian continent. And so it is of worth and of note that data protection authorities must work together in order to ensure that there are protections when it comes to personal data in all areas. If we have a coordinated approach in how to do this, then it will be very easy for us to ensure that we enforce the data protection acts or regulations that are, or frameworks that are in each individual country, to ensure that we've got protection universally that applies to the citizens of any particular nation.
Now, it is interesting on that conversation, because I think more Kenyans have always been asking that, we have a data protection office, but we feel, do we know even our rights with regards to our data, and even the businesses as well? Because why I'm asking this question is that if you go to EU GDPR, EU, for example, we have seen cases where some of these multinationals were held accountable for sharing information of the citizens of EU citizens. A good example is one of the social media companies has a different policy set when it comes to European Union citizens, and a different policy set when it was updating its policy to other cities or other parts of the continent. It has a different policy when it comes to the US. So the question comes in, does African Union or other governments willing to be able to have a unified force to be, can it be, maybe we take it from maybe the African Union level, can we be able to have that strong force, just like the European Union have done, where they have one single text document? What exactly is your take on that?
I think having a unified force obviously gives one a louder voice when it comes to enforcement of some things, and so I'm definitely for it. However, the form that it takes is something that needs to be discussed, especially now as we move into operationalizing or seeing how the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement can be operationalized, because I think data protection is going to be at the forefront of some of these things, especially once we start moving into a single digital market. I will say that, even as there are policies that are being made by multinationals on different, I'm not defending anyone, but there are conversations that are being had on a African levels for I guess the countries that are part of the coalition of the willing, so to speak, that have joined these sorts of conversations. However, I definitely agree that a unified approach is required, but one of the things that I think we need to consider and we need to remember and needs to be at the forefront of one's mind is, even as we're moving to this, data protection is relatively new when it comes to the continent. Yes, we've had countries such as South Africa having their the POPI Act coming into place in 2012. However, in the EU, for example, some of these countries have had a data protection framework or legislation from the 80s. You know, in the 80s, if you asked an African what data protection is, they would not be able to advise what it is unless that was your area of expertise. And so we're still growing and we're still evolving, not to say that we need to give or afford a lesser protection to our citizens and people resident on the continent. But I think for them to get to a place where they have a coordinated approach, it has taken time. And I'm hoping that as Africa will be able to leapfrog and not see it take over 20 years or 30 years for us to get to a point where we're having a coordinated approach. But we'll see the efforts, and we have attempted to. I think there was a Malabo Convention that has come into place. Unfortunately, it wasn't picked up by many African nations. I think so far there are only about 5 signatories or people that have ratified the convention. But it does provide a framework. Perhaps now if the conversation is started, people will then see the benefits of having that sort of coordinated approach around Africa, and perhaps it's time to call on African states to look at how exactly we can achieve this as we move to implement the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I'm sorry you were the one going to tackle the question.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Ask away.
Today, I'm going to expose you to the Kenyan data protection. You're going to carry all the sins of the continent. So excuse me, I will have to ensure you take all the blame.
That is fine.
Yeah. Yes, I think most of them, they're late. So there's another question that's coming from the audience, and I love the conversation is engaging. You know, the audience, for example, somebody is asking us, what drives data protection laws? Is it privacy concerns or individual ownership, permission, or data usage? What exactly drives the data protection? Maybe I can share it with you. Maybe you can have a look at it. So that's the question that's coming from one of our audience. I don't know whether you saw it.
Right. Okay. I'm just looking at it now. So I guess data protection laws are driven by lots of things. Over the last few years, I think the right to privacy and the right to have control of personal data has been something that has pushed data protection laws. But in Africa, I think one of the major pushes, at least in Kenya, has been digitizing of systems, and not necessarily digitizing, because I think Africa has a very, specifically Kenya has a very nuanced way of dealing with data. You know, in Kenya, for example, you walk into a building and you must give, you know, your name, your ID number. Sometimes you even have to give your actual ID for you to get access to the building. And this is not to say that it's necessarily a bad thing, because the reasons why we do this is specifically when it comes to issues of national security, so that people can be held accountable should anything happen, such as a terrorism attack. On the building, would be able to find exactly who walks in, and especially nowadays when it comes to COVID, there is a need for tracing, and so it's not necessarily a bad thing. However, when it comes to how data is being used, a lot of people who collect this information then manage to sell it, either for marketing purposes or for a range of reasons, effectively to commercialize data that is not necessarily in digital form. And in Kenya, that has been a major concern. And a major issue where data privacy is concerned. Data protection is not necessarily a recognized human right in its strict sense, but when you look at the sense that people do have a right to privacy and a right to have the information about them protected, then if you look at it in that sense, then data protection is actually a human right and is deserving of protection. So So in a way, to answer the question that was put forward, data protection is driven, or laws are driven by very many things, and it is a nuanced approach based on what the culture of the country is. In Europe, privacy is very big, which is why these data protection acts have been in place since the 80s. In Kenya, it is just starting to be important because we're actively moving into a data economy or a digital economy, and so there's a need for us to then rise up and have this. But then also there's a need to be competitive. Which is one of the things that we need to consider. As GDPR came into place, there's a number of countries that rose up and decided that data protection is something that is key to them, so that they could be globally competitive when it comes to dealing with data, not only of people in their country, but people in the rest of the world. And this has been, the motivations may be fueled by other acts, but it is definitely something that is a good push for that to happen. So it's commendable that GDPR came into place and put more stringent data protection provisions so that the rest of the world could see the importance of having data protection, especially to have that competitive edge, even where innovation is concerned.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I love the fact the way you clarified that. Maybe, but the other question, I know a number of data protection bills or acts have also been inspired by EU GDPR. The question comes because if you look at the EU GDPR, they're what we call enforcement, for example, with regards to businesses, where you're talking about maybe 4% of their turnover in case the data is not, they don't follow the rules and regulations. My question to you, with regards to Kenya, what exactly are the enforcements that you have, or rather we have, in our data protection with regards to businesses as well? Back to you.
Okay. So we've got that's a very it's an interesting question, because as I sit here, I am of the view that the enforcement procedures or the enforcement amounts that have been put in the Data Protection Act are not adequate. The point of this enforcement is to be not necessarily punitive, but to ensure that as people are conducting their business, that fine that they may get, that penalty that they may get is top of mind, so that they can actively ensure compliant. In Kenya, currently, the Act provides for 5 million or 1% of their revenue. Unfortunately, the Act says whichever is lower and not whichever is higher. And hopefully we can see that this Act is amended so that that lesser is changed to higher. But if we look at when you look at in terms of the big companies, then of course that's not punitive at all, and it's not a deterrent. And so many people, and that's the whole point of these penalty provisions, to be a deterrent. But if you look at the landscape, and especially Kenyan landscape, we have, I think, majority of our organizations, I would say more than 70% of the organizations are actually small, micro, small, and medium enterprises. So we don't necessarily have large enterprises unless they're multinationals that come into the country. And so a lot of the people that are processing will either fall into the small business category or the micro business category. And so in that respect, for Kenyan businesses, that 5 million may be punitive and may even be seen by some to be excessive. And so those are the provisions that we put into place. The Act is still a work in progress. As I said, data protection is very new in Kenya. It's only formally, I think, a year and 7 months, if just a bit more. And so it is something that we need to, in fact, I think the mode that has been taken by the office is to ensure that there is awareness and compliance first before there is a push for enforcement, because no one really knows. And I think you've touched on this. No one knows what their rights are. No one knows what their obligations are. And the people that do are a very small percentage of the population. So being an office that has just been in place for 7 months, that's one of our biggest challenges, is to ensure that there is awareness of one's rights, one's obligations, one's duties, so that even as we're moving to push compliance, there is a culture that has already been formed. There is a mind change as to what data protection is and what measures need to be put in any organization, whether it's digitally based or otherwise, to ensure that there are provisions that are being actively implemented for data protection compliance.
Yeah, now today you are on the hot seat.
That's okay. Carry on.
There's a question coming along.
Yeah.
It's a bit political, so I have to try and see how we answer it.
Okay.
Because somebody's asking a question, I believe it might be a Kenyan, is asking, what's your opinion on the recent issue regarding ORPP and Kenyan's data? I'm sure you might have seen this on Twitter.
Yes. And unfortunately,
you won't answer
it is political, but it's still a very live issue. So please forgive me if I do not respond to this question. I think that the person who's asked the question will get answers as to what the view is from the office itself. I come here as myself today, but I still work for an office, and so if you'd pardon me just for today, maybe the next time that we meet when it's not such a hot topic, I could respond to that.
I think the ministry can give a press release on this. I saw it is a bit political, so I will also excuse you not to respond to it. And I hope our audience will excuse us for that, because you are not representing the office today, you're just Rose. So I beg you, the audience, to allow us to pass on that question. Now, there's another question that came here, is that with regards to, maybe my other question comes into, you've talked about the enforcement part before I go to the public, is that we have put in already, we are good at writing laws, we are good at writing regulations. But the problem always in Africa we face is when it comes to the enforcement. So we've written this. Is there any, even typical case that you give of any enforcement? I know the office is new, it's just a few months, but have we had even any form of enforcement from where you sit? It doesn't have to be, you don't have to name names, but you can give a scenario maybe where we have gone ahead and followed some of these violators of Data Protection Act. Back to
you. Just very broadly, yes. There are instances where we have commenced investigation proceedings or procedures to ensure that we get to the bottom of what is happening, especially where we get a complaint. Some of them we've done it out of our own volition, as is provided under the Act, where the Data Commissioner can engage in investigations, what we call in the legal field suo motu, or in colloquial terms, on her own initiative. And so this has been done and this has been carried out. As I mentioned before, we sit in a very challenging position where this is a new act. For a year of its, after its enactment, not many people knew about it. And so people were waiting on an office to give direction as to how exactly to comply. And now the office has come into force. And if you know how acts or legal I guess legislation is done in Kenya, especially when it comes to establishing an office, it is very broad in nature. And so it says, a data processor cannot do this or cannot do that. But in terms of implementation, especially practicality of implementation, it says refer to regulations. Now, when it says refer to regulations, the regulations aren't formed unless someone actually initiates that process to form it, which is why the Cabinet Secretary this year created the task force, so that there is guidelines or guidance for people to actually come into place and see what exactly it is that they need to do. So when the Act says you must prepare a document, you must seek advice from the Data Protection Commissioner, there is a guideline as to how exactly to do so. So in a way, we're caught in a catch-22 situation where we receive complaints, but then what we're doing is having people who don't understand what their obligations are. So what is it for us? Because one of the mandates of the office is to actually create awareness and to build a culture of awareness where it comes to data protection. So do we start enforcing, or do we start ensuring that there is awareness that is created? And I think the Data Commissioner has taken a very sensible view to this, in the sense that we're building a culture of compliance, and that is a priority of the office, to ensure that everyone who collects personal data does not just say, I'm collecting information and there is no data protection. But in the fore of their minds, there must be that spirit of data protection, and that willingness to ensure that they're complying. Otherwise, they are aware of the consequences, and from then the issue of enforcement starts becoming quite easy, because now you find that you go to someone, they've done something. They're told, do you know of data protection? And I know that obviously ignorance isn't a defense, but in this sense, if you're not aware at all, because awareness has not been created, it's a very novel thing. It's almost you'd almost have to punish everyone. Every single one would have to come under the hammer, because I don't think that as a nation, as data controls, I don't think that we're all wanting or knowing how to be in compliance with the Act. Hopefully the regulations, as we continue to go through them, as they're implemented, as they're enacted, will give that guidance, and so no one will be able to say that we didn't know about it, especially since we've gone through extensive public participation, so people have them in the front of their minds. But it is still a work in progress. It's still a new office, and hopefully as we continue, we will see more and more organizations complying, and with that, we will see more and more enforcements of non-compliance.
Yeah. Now, thanks so much, Rosa. And I think, as you say, Kenya is in that progress. It's a new office. There will be challenges. That's why I could have wished, our counterparts from Nigeria and South Africa could have joined us.
Yes.
I think Prof. Sizwe has sent his apologies. He was attending to a situation in court, so we allow him for that. He will join us next time. He has sent his apology to you as well, and of course, Professor as well, Agiola from Nigeria, has not managed to join. But as we almost touch to the base of our end of conversation, there's a question that comes in. I think it's more of an industry, and I ask him because I know you are also a privacy professional. So the question comes in, I know you wear the cap both as a regulator and a privacy professional, but the question comes in, how do we balance security versus requirement for data collectors to forget data unless given explicit permission? I think you can see the question. What's your take on that?
When you say security, I think there's a need to clarify. So perhaps maybe, are we talking about generically cybersecurity issues? Are we talking about national security issues? And so there's a need to clarify that. But I'll ask the question effectively as I understand it. I think it is known, and this applies to very many rights, that most rights are not absolute. There are not, there are exceptions in most cases as to how a right is going to apply. Say, for example, I think if any of you are Kenyan here, there was that question when we were appointing a Chief Justice as to, if you have a right to housing, but then you have a mortgage and the mortgagor kicks you out of your house, who are they allowed to do that? And the answer is yes, because you don't have an absolute right to housing, especially if you are going to do something that is contrary to your obligations under contract or contrary to your obligations under law. And the same way, data protection or the right to privacy or the right to be forgotten is not absolute. So the Act specifically gives exemptions as to where one's right to be forgotten can be overruled, so to speak, and this comes to if you're doing it for legal purposes, if there's a contractual reason why you must have that information, issues of national security, where your right to be forgotten affects another data subject's rights adversely, and so there is a need even as we do that, and sometimes in practice or in theory it's very difficult to see some of these things and how they apply. But if you're given explicit permission, obviously that's one thing. But when it comes to security, one needs to really look at how exactly is it impacting your legitimate interests as a data controller, for example. How is it limiting the interests of another data subject when it comes to rights to be forgotten? How is it dealing with issues of national security? How does it affect that? How does it affect your ability to defend a legal claim? And you can, on those basis, reject a request for the right to be forgotten. But in that case as well, you must be aware that the data subject does have an avenue in which it can appeal your decision, and ultimately that decision may come to the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, which will look at the facts that's before it and make a determination as to whether your response or your refusal to exercise for a data subject to exercise that right is adequate, or it is not. So in practice, I'm not sure, because I haven't really been given an example as to how to do it, but theoretically, I think that's how one would deal with it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rose. I am sorry I have made your 40 minutes or 30 minutes of hot fire, but I wish the other panelists could have joined us, could have even be more fun as well, as everybody sweats for my questions. But I'm happy that you enjoyed the time with me, and I want to thank you for your time. Thank you so much. In case anyone has any question, they can reach out to you. Maybe you can say a word on closing.
Thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to be here. It is regrettable that the counterparts from South Africa and Nigeria aren't here, because I think specifically South Africa, I'd have loved to gain a bit of insight as to how they're dealing with the issues of data protection, and I guess Nigeria from a cybersecurity angle. I'm not aware of whether they've got a standalone data protection regulation. From what I understood, based on some research that I did last year, there wasn't one that was established, but there was segmented data protection provisions in different acts. So it would have been good to get some insights on that. But that being said, for the Kenyans that have asked questions, we look forward to engaging with you, and the office is very reachable. And so if there's any questions or concerns, whether you're a data controller or data subject and wish to be aware of your rights, the office is open. And so you can get us on www.odpc.go.ke. And for those of you that are in industry and globally working, that are interested in knowing about what we do, our information is also online, but it'd be good to share and continue some of these conversations, Gilbert, on how exactly we can achieve international best standards. So thank you so much for having me. I look forward to engaging as well on the other discussions, so I'll stay put through the next few sessions, and thank you everyone that has participated.
Thank you so much.
There's someone who said, how can we reach you? So you can get me on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn is Rose Musero Maina, M-A-I-N-A. I'm accessible on LinkedIn, but if you do want to catch me professionally, shoot me a LinkedIn message, and I will give you my email.
Yeah, before you leave, I think the young panel, or rather the young attendees who are with us here, they are happy for the first time to see engaging with a young person. Most cases you engage with these offices is old people, and we feel like fresh of breath air, that we have young, quiet. And you see, there's a lady who has just given you a lot of compliments. She said she's done so well, thanks to her. You can see what she's saying there. I think this gives us, a breath of fresh air to see, the young generation of Africans. We call them the tiger generation, or because we are tired of the hippo generation.
Wow.
We are so happy that we see young people in the office, and pass my message to your boss. We want to see young people in that office. Thank you so much.
Yes, I will do. And just on that, I think you can see that even in governance in around Kenya, there has been a push to ensure that we're integrating young people within the government structures. I think in our conversation a few days ago, you mentioned that there were chief administrative secretaries or assistant ministers that are below the age of 35, and that is a push in the whole of government to ensure that young people actually actively have a seat in policy making and decision making. So yes, so it's great to see that, because people like me get an opportunity. So
and we are so happy. We'll keep clapping for you, and we're gonna support you. And thank you as well for supporting the forum to be with us. And we hope that we're gonna see you again next year.
I'm sure you will.
Thank you so much.
Gilbert.
Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
You too. Thank you.
Transition to our next session. Enjoy a session with Craig Jones of last year on Interpol. Have a good one.
To harmonise some of the legislation so we can exchange evidence and things like that as well, because obviously if the laws are harmonised, then what I would refer to as a cyber attack or theft of data in one country would be the same in another country. So if you have that harmonised, if it's not quite harmonised, that's when it becomes a little bit more difficult for law enforcement to exchange that data and information. And we have a process, an MLAT process, which is like a judicial process that we go through about exchanging data. I know there's a number of sort of conventions that are touted around trying to bring countries together under certain conventions. I know in Africa you're looking at the Malibu one, which is not a convention as yet because I don't think it's been ratified, but also there's the Budapest one. But when you look at these sort of conventions, there's a number of similarities to them, and the United Nations are doing a huge amount of work in that space effectively to try and align that. When it does come back to doing the investigations side and the frustrations, I think, yes, because there is this piece around law enforcement, you know, the courts quite often still sit, don't they? We're still quite paper-based in the courts. So when we look at the digital evidence and trying to present that in a way that, you know, the judiciary understands that, the jury understands that, and, you know, this is going to take quite a while still to develop effectively. When you look at, you know, the cycles that we've gone through and the growth just of the networks, the mobile networks, the physical computer networks and the infrastructure, trying to, you know, sometimes unpick that and make that easily understandable in the court process to say, well, actually, who was responsible for pressing that button for that cyber crime? Because, you know, who was behind that? And again, coming back to your point about how the growth is that, and when you look at AI, you know, as programs start to develop, and again, I'll stress I'm not an expert in this area, but when you look about how AI is used and the possibilities for AI, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, there's some really good that it can be used for, but potentially there's some other sort of pieces it can be used for as well. So yeah, we here in Singapore have an innovation centre, and they do constantly are doing horizon scanning effectively. So they're looking at seeing, you know, what are the trends, what are the themes that are going on. Digital forensics is one of their main areas. They've just done a very interesting report, or a couple of reports actually, one about best practice in collecting digital evidence and dealing with that from a law enforcement side, and that's available to 194 countries. But also they've just done one for drones as well, which is quite topical at the moment as well. It's not cybercrime per se, but you can just see all the different things that policing and society is having to deal with.
Right. Let's talk about that harmonization of laws. There's been several disputes, especially when you look at blue chip tech companies that are offering services across wide geographical spaces without the need to physically be there. I'll give you an example. There's been a huge debate about should a company like Netflix, for example, pay taxes in Kenya when they really don't have an office in Kenya? Or whenever we have such kind of disputes, then where do you take this and how do you enforce such things? Because most people say, if I'm an organization operating in a space that I'm not wanted, I'll just shut my laptop and go. What is the role of big corporates in fostering an environment for harmonization of laws?
So I think we all have a role to play. We all have to work in a responsible way and in society. When it comes into who's taxed where and things like that, I'm not a taxation expert or anything like that. I think for law enforcement, what we look at is what are the laws that we're dealing with at that particular time within that country effectively, and then we look to enforce those laws on behalf of the society that's serving within those countries. I think you can liken a little bit of this to the COVID situation as well, where a number of restrictions were brought in countries and the law had to catch up very, very quickly to how could we impose some of those laws or legislation that was brought in. Some of it might have come about because it was already there because of infectious diseases and infectious disease acts in countries. So again, some of it was already there. But coming back to sort of how the international side does of it, it's about that global infrastructure, isn't it? It is now everywhere. So again, it's not that physical act is created by being in that country physically. It's the virtual side of that as well. And I think that for me is very much the society and government responsibility. Those are the conversations and debates that need to be had at the government level and with industry as well. And then whatever the laws and legislations come out, if there's a sort of judicial side to that and a law enforcement side to that, then we will look to deal with it at that time effectively. But looking how legislation keeps up in the law enforcement terms, within the United Kingdom, we have the Computer Misuse Act 1990. There was some very, very good legislation written at that time. But like anything, as times move on, this is where quite often laws are just added to. So you would have, section 3A. So you have an A added to it, which will add another bit in. So sometimes we do it in a piecemeal approach because it can be quite difficult to, re-look at those laws and make them fit everything as well. But again, from a law enforcement standpoint, it's down to those member countries to devise those laws and then actually enact those laws through their sort of judiciary and law enforcement capabilities in the countries.
Craig, are there factors that predispose Africa to cyber threats? And I'll give you an example. Lots of speakers spoke in the morning and we're looking at different data sets, and there are some trends that were interesting and worrying. For example, if you're looking at insider threat, phishing, and different manner of threats, you'd point out countries like South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya as leading in those areas. From the work that you do, what are some of the factors that predispose some of these economies to cyber threats?
I think all the things you've just said there are relevant across the globe effectively. I think what we look at in respect of is that awareness, and that's part of what law enforcement's role is around coming back to protecting the community side of that. So law enforcement in the country now is changing and evolving a little bit in the way they police. But again, a lot of police officers, they join the police to chase after the bad people within their communities. And by their communities, I mean physically. So, a lot of us grew up in the communities we ended up policing in because we wanted to do that.
Right.
In the virtual world, that's quite a different space for us. And for law enforcement as well, we need to, and we are looking at, in fact, what's that policing model like now? How does it look? So do we do and have to do a lot more with the private sector that own the infrastructure, for example? So how can we raise the awareness of the crimes that are being facilitated because of the infrastructure? I'm not picking any companies out in particular. This is about that sort of the internet and, the way that is, glued together through different ways. Then we've got, of course, got all the sort of programs and things like that, which, you know, can have their vulnerabilities in there. So again, we look at the patching side of that. Now, as a police officer, to go out and have this conversation where, yes, you've got to patch, you know, you've got to keep everything updated, you know, two-factor authentication is really important. You know, as cops, to go out and have that conversation with communities, it's quite hard for us to do that at times. Another model, and again, so I know I'm referring to a few UK models here, but there's the Cyber Resilience Centres in the United Kingdom, which have been set up. That is a sort of an aggregation between the private sector, academia and policing. The way that sort of model works is they bring together small, medium enterprises that may not be able to afford that high-end protection from cyber attacks. They bring the police in to try and support them around the protection side, but also they bring the universities in because, and I think this is where potentially is a good model in Africa, because we have a lot of people now at universities, at colleges, taking diplomas around cybersecurity, computer science, programming. They're getting some fantastic skills, but then when they come out from universities, the jobs may not be there. So they then look, okay, well, how are we going to use these skills? So one of the parts of that program is to bring those people in that are doing their courses and help them and put them with policing, but also with industry to start looking at, okay, let's see how we can take some small steps to begin with to protect you at a smaller cost. We can give the students some real exposure then to work, if you like, in what they're hoping to do around cybersecurity. So it's a sort of win-win all round effectively. And I know that model is being looked at now by a number of different countries as well. And if anybody wants any further information on that as well, I'm happy to provide that for them as well. Because again, part of what our role is here at Interpol is to bring in the good ideas. As I said, that horizon scanning and say, okay, well, hang on, that worked really well, I think, in that country. Let's see if we could bring it halfway around the world and see if it works there. Now, it might have worked well in that country because of certain cultural reasons, things like that. And it's just going to, you know, really flop when we take it into that other country. But that's why it's great to have so many people in our team at Interpol being able to look at these things and advise us on that. Because I might think, oh, what a great idea that is. And someone will say, no, Craig, that's never going to work there because they don't have this, or this, or that's not a priority. It's like, oh, okay, right. And that's sort of the other factors we need to consider in our sort of international work.
Right. Craig, as we bring this to a landing, I'd like you to look at your crystal ball and just looking at from where you sit, what are the biggest opportunities and challenges as far as the whole cyber crime is concerned, especially on the African landscape?
So I think on the African landscape, across any landscape, is the data and information is the first one. And I would say that, you know, when we're talking about cyber and the online, it's about getting that data and information collected in a timely manner, and it's relevant to what we're looking at. So understanding that threat picture. And then in the Africa region, for us, one of the things we're really looking to do at the moment is supporting the countries as best as we can by actually making it a priority. So making the cybercrime a priority within those countries. Now, the countries may have different priorities and also different definitions of cybercrime, but if we can access funding or get officers seconded into our regional bureaus from the African countries, look to bring experts on contract in to support them over a 2-3 year model going forward to develop their skill sets. Now, we don't need to take them right up to that top level, or anybody in policing to a degree, where they're doing reverse malware engineering and things like that. That's useful, but industry are really good at doing that. So let's leverage on the industry side of that as well. And then from here in Singapore, we can then look at the cyber criminality and where that's sort of emanating from. We know sort of the Nigeria region is, you know, doing a number of different scams, the organised crime groups. It's not always just on cybercrime, we look around enough of different crime types. So actually looking at criminal groups within Africa and how they're impacting worldwide, but also what's the crime that's impacting in Africa as well? How can we better protect all those users on their mobile phones effectively as well to stop them losing money, you know, when they're using the apps on their mobile phones? I think it's a long journey though, and this is where I'm going to be, you know, put some realism around this. You know, this for me, the program that we're running here The first iteration was sort of a setting up. We're now moving into a more sort of information, data, intelligence-led focus, and then into the operational side of that. But we've also got to be very mindful about building the capabilities up as we go along as well. But it's a fantastic area to work in, whether you're in law enforcement, whether you're in industry. It's a growing area. You can work from anywhere in the world. Certainly, you know, anybody that's young enough to retrain or has that aptitude, I would wholeheartedly encourage people, you know, to get into the cybersecurity side of things, because for cybersecurity, you can read crime prevention as well. And I think it's important that we sort of marry those two together and sort of utilize the best from each effectively.
Fantastic. Craig Jones, Director for Cybercrime at Interpol. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to enlighten us on what you do. I, for one, I'm excited that, I mean, all we knew about Interpol was enforcing arrest warrants on movies, but that's certainly more than that. So thank you very much. And I hope that for a lot of the people who will be listening, there's lots of opportunities for partnering within the local police units and Interpol and looking at making this space a lot safer for everyone. So thank you very much, Craig. I don't know what time it is in Singapore right now, but many thanks for making time.
11 o'clock in the evening, but thank you very much, Bonnie. It's been well worth staying up. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
So if you're watching us, that brings us to the end of this very exciting conversation about the role of Interpol and other law enforcement in making it much safer.